The duel between Yugi and Kaiba is well underway, and this is a legendary duel. This is the duel that was adapted into the first episode of the Duel Monsters anime. This is the duel where Kaiba first summons all 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons at once against Yugi. This is the duel where Yugi defeats Kaiba with Exodia the Forbidden One, the most powerful monster in the game, capable of ending any duel with a single attack. And I don't like it very much at all. I know that that is going to be a controversial statement among Yu-Gi-Oh fans, but I know I'm not the only person who feels this way. I know that Kazuki Takahashi did his best to make this duel feel exciting. But the same problem that I had with the previous game, Capsule Monster Chess, that I've had both times that characters have played Capsule Monsters Chess, I have here too. Kazuki Takahashi wants the freedom to write exciting scenarios in spite of the rules rather than trying to write them within the rules of his made-up games. And so the rules to Duel Monsters are very fast and loose. This is exactly the opposite of the kind of philosophy I feel like he should have had here. And I actually have receipts. Later on, after the manga switches to using rules that are more like the actual card game rules, because the actual card game is out at this point, I think the duels get a lot better because Kazuki Takahashi is trying to work within those rules and so has to come up with more interesting, more logical scenarios. Here, it really feels like he's just kind of making rules up as he goes along. And what's worse is the way that he writes the characters. It really feels like they're making plays which purposefully put themselves in situations for Takahashi to do that rather than playing the game like they logically would. Like, for example, Kaiba tries to counter Yugi's Winged Dragon Guardian the Fortress with a ground-based monster with the exact same attack points, despite the fact that 2 monsters with the same attack points kill each other, so neither of them will actually win the exchange in the first place. And also despite the fact that apparently there's a rule in this game where flying monsters have the ability to avoid damage from non-flying monsters. This means that because the 2 monsters have the same attack points, if Winged Dragon avoids the damage from Kaiba's monster, only Kaiba's monster will take the damage, and therefore only Kaiba's monster will be destroyed. Why would Kaiba make this move? I understand that it's supposed to be a big twist from the audience's perspective that this is a rule in the game, but Kaiba would know that rule. So why wouldn't he defend instead? Why would he risk making himself look like an idiot losing to one of Yugi's most basic cards? I mean, I get it, if he had defended with his monster, it would have been guaranteed to die without taking the other monster with it. But if there is a 1 in 3 chance of that happening anyway, I just don't see the point. It's not as if he couldn't have defended with a weaker monster instead and still had the relatively powerful Wicked Worm Beast in his hand in case he needed it later. This is when we also learn that if your attack fails and you lose your monster, you're able to play another monster in defense mode before your turn ends. It's never really confirmed throughout this duel what exactly the rules are around being able to attack your opponent's life points directly with one of your monsters. In the regular game, it's just whenever they don't have a monster and it's your battle phase, any of your monsters who can still attack can take their full attack points out of your opponent's life points. Here, though, with only 2,000 life points per player, pretty much any monster can end the game immediately. So it just doesn't make sense for that to be a thing yet. And later on, when they're still using these same rules with the 2,000 life points, it doesn't seem like you can attack directly at all. And yet, this rule exists where Kaiba, having lost his own monster during his own turn, is able to play another defender so that he's not open on his opponent's next turn. If Yugi can't attack him directly, then what's the point of that rule? It does seem later on that if you fail to play a monster for a full 1 of your turns, when it comes back around to your opponent's turn, they can attack you directly. But if that's the case, then Kaiba still wouldn't have needed to defend here because he still managed to play a monster during the turn. It just happened to die. It really makes no sense, and if the rules were better defined, if we understood why the characters are making these decisions, they wouldn't bother me as much. But we don't, because the rules aren't better defined. There's also weird instances throughout this chapter where people's life points go down for seemingly no reason. When Yugi is doing nothing but defending, he loses a few more life points, and it makes no sense. It's drama for the sake of drama, despite the fact that it doesn't work logically within the situation. And that's not to say that there aren't a few great dramatic moments in the first couple chapters of this duel, which spans 3 chapters of the manga. Kaiba using a spell card to triple the attack power of his Sagi the Dark Cloud is really cool. It's a very memorable scene, and Yugi drawing Gaia the Fierce Knight from his deck at just the right moment to counter Sagi is also a great dramatic moment. It's also a very memorable moment, as is Kaiba immediately likewise drawing the Blue Eyes White Dragon to counter Gaia. That is by far one of the most memorable exchanges in this duel. Yugi freezing 2 of the 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons with Swords of Revealing Light, and summoning Dark Magician for the first time to fight back against the other monsters that Kaiba summons instead. That is super memorable. But none of that is really memorable for the gameplay. It's memorable for the cool designs of the spells and monsters. Which, in its own way, is good storytelling, don't get me wrong. But in a manga about characters playing games, the game itself should be part of the hook, and here it's just not. What does manage to be a pretty effective hook, though, is Yugi looking at the pieces of Exodia that he's drawn up to this point and not knowing what they are, calling them garbage and similar things. Because he is, in this moment, very stressed out, he's in no fit state of mind to be showing respect to these seemingly super weak cards. It isn't until he wonders what his grandpa would say to him in this situation that he comes to an epiphany, that these cards might be pieces to a greater puzzle, similar to the pieces of his Millennium Puzzle. When he is finally faced with all three of Kaiba's Blue Eyes White Dragons, he comes to the realization that completing that puzzle, whatever it is, may be the only chance that he has to win this duel, and I'm just going to come right out and say it, it's the only chance that he had to win this duel. But faced with these three seemingly invincible cards, and knowing what the stakes are in this game, he can't bring himself to do it until, just like he remembered his grandpa earlier, he remembers his friends and how they're always there to support him, even if they're not literally at his side. And whether the last piece of Exodia really was the first card on his deck, or this was the first instance that the other Yugi used one of his abilities later to bend fate and draw the card that he needed when he needed it, we will never really know. What we do know is that thanks to the presence of his friends, he is able to find the courage to draw that card. It is the fifth piece of Exodia, and he is able to summon Exodia into the duel, destroy all three Blue Eyes White Dragons at once, and deplete Kaiba's life points with a single attack. And that is where the chapter ends, and I'm going to be talking about the next chapter in the next review, so I'm not going to get into any of the stuff that happens there today. This chapter's fine, don't get me wrong, I don't hate it or anything. It's just, there is so much better Duel Monsters related content later on in the manga that looking back on this story, on this game, it just doesn't thrill me the way that it used to. Maybe it's because I've seen this duel so many times in so many different forms. I've watched the Japanese version of the first episode of the anime. I've watched the dubbed version of the first episode of the anime. I watched the uncut version. I watched a fan-dubbed version. I've watched the Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged series version multiple times. Maybe I'm just so super saturated with this duel that it doesn't impress me for that reason, but I don't think that's the case, because at the end of the day, aside from some really cool character designs and some really cool exchanges, and some admittedly very well-timed dramatic moments, this duel is not a very good one. It's really the character stuff in this chapter that shines through the most, I think. Seeing Yugi feel so dejected, feeling like he's already failed in the face of such adversity. Seeing Kaiba grow more and more sure of himself. Seeing Yugi realizing that his bonds make him strong enough to face any challenge, and using that to his advantage. And then finally seeing Kaiba pulled down from that mountaintop, brought back down to earth. All of that is super effective, and it's what I tend to remember the most when thinking back on this chapter. It's the kind of stuff that, if you've only watched the anime, you probably missed, because they do try to cram some of it into that very short, very abridged duel in the first episode of the anime. But in order to fit the entirety of that duel into the episode, they have to cut a lot of this character stuff out, and it really sucks. So even though this isn't one of my favorite games in the series, everything else about it makes it a great climax to this arc. And if you have not seen this version of this duel, you really should go back and read it. Find it online somewhere and read it, or pick up the volume of the manga that has it in it at like a half-price books or something and read through it. It's worth it. I just want to be clear that I think these chapters should be remembered not for the game itself, but for everything happening around it. That said though, guys, if you have read this chapter of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, I'd like to know, what do you think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. Either way though, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.